Okay, so you're here with us because you want to get right to the heart of things, right? I mean, like really cut through all the noise and figure out what's actually going on in this crazy, complicated world we live in.
Yeah, exactly. You want those aha moments, those bursts of clarity, but without having to go back to school and get a PhD just to understand it all.
And that's exactly what we try to do here on the deep dive. We dig deep into the stuff that really matters and try to make sense of it all together.
And today, oh man, today we're going deep into a document that is seriously thought-provoking and
Kind of out there.
kind of out there, yeah. It's called Cirque 3.0 Oltarja Kvantnega duhovnika Priadnosti.
Which basically translates to Church 3.0, from altar to quantum priest of the future, for those of us who don't speak Slovenian.
Yeah, and the title alone kind of tells you this isn't your typical historical analysis of the church.
Right. It's not looking back. It's
Yeah,
looking way forward.
exactly.
Yeah.
This document tries to connect the dots between the Catholic Church's, long history, all those centuries of tradition, and then all the prophecies that have kind of shaped its narrative over the years.
And then it throws in the massive impact of technology, like right now in the digital age.
Yeah, and it even tries to grasp the essence of spirituality in this rapidly changing world. So it's really ambitious, trying to bridge those ancient traditions with what it sees as like a quantum future.
A quantum future for the church. That's a really big idea. So what's our mission in this deep dive today?
Our goal here is to pull out the most important, the most insightful ideas from this document. So we want to help you understand the major forces that are shaping the Catholic Church at this very moment, and then try to glimpse where it might be headed.
Okay, cool. So let's jump right in this whole Church 3.0 concept. What's the core shift that this document's describing?
So at its heart, Church 3.0 is this idea of a radical transformation, a move away from the traditional altar, which symbolizes all those established structures, rituals, and ways of doing things within the church.
Right, the old ways.
Yeah, exactly. And it's moving toward something new, the digital realm symbolized by the algorithm. And then it gets even wilder. It even speculates about the potential for a quantum priest.
A quantum priest. Okay, we're definitely going to need to unpack that one.
Oh, yeah, definitely. So this 3.0 label, it signifies the third major phase in the church's evolution. As the document lays it out, phase 1.0 was all about establishing those foundational physical structures.
Like building the churches and all that.
Exactly. Building the churches, setting up the hierarchy, and, relying primarily on spoken and written communication.
Within those local communities.
Right, exactly. Then came phase 2.0, which arrived with the internet and all the connectivity that brought it around for. That's when the church started dipping its toes into the digital world, creating websites, doing online outreach.
It was still kind of like just an extension of the physical church, right?
Yeah, exactly. They took what they were already doing and tried to put it online. But now with 3.0, the idea is that digital technologies and this concept of quantum thought are not just tools. They're completely reshaping how the church functions, how it thinks, and how it interacts with the world. And this is where that whole idea of a new altar of the quantum priest comes into play.
Okay, so we're talking about some seriously big changes here. So within this massive shift, what are the key themes that this document really digs into?
Well, the document identifies 6 central themes that it explores. The first one is all about how the church is trying to navigate its long history while simultaneously confronting this, rapidly changing digital future.
Right, like how do you hold on to tradition while also embracing the new?
Exactly. It's a balancing act. Then the second theme is all about the role of prophecies, and particularly how they've been both sources of fear and also sources of hope throughout the church's history.
Like those end times prophecies.
Yeah. Those two, but also prophecies that have shaped how people view the papacy and the church's role in the world. Then the third theme focuses on the inherent tension between the church's deeply rooted traditions and, the increasing emphasis on democratic values in modern society.
So like individual choice versus established doctrine.
Yeah, exactly. That kind of friction. The fourth theme delves into all the challenges and opportunities that come with algorithms and the whole concept of a virtual church.
Like how do you build a community online?
Exactly. And how does that impact faith and religious practice? Then the fifth theme looks at that constant balancing act between traditional spiritual practices centered around the physical altar and then the growing influence of technology in everyone's lives.
So like how do you make space for prayer and contemplation in a world that's constantly buzzing with notifications?
Yeah, that's a big one. And then finally, the sixth theme considers the possibility that traditional papal authority could be challenged or transformed by all these new digital realities, leading potentially to the emergence of this new quantum priest figure.
Okay, so lots to unpack there. Let's talk about prophecies for a bit, especially the famous one attributed to Saint Malachi. What's the story behind that one?
Well, it's fascinating how this prophecy, supposedly from a 12th century Irish archbishop, still captures so much attention today, even though it was almost certainly created in the 16th century to try and influence papal elections.
Really? So it's not even that old.
Not really.
Right.
And, you know, it consists of 112 short Latin phrases that are each supposed to describe a different pope, starting way back in the 12th century.
And how accurate has it actually been?
Well, that's the thing. The descriptions for the popes who reigned before 1595, when the prophecy was first published, they often fit surprisingly well, or at least you can interpret them in ways that make sense.
But after that,
After that, the descriptions for the later popes, they become much more general, much more open to different interpretations. And this big difference in accuracy is one of the main reasons why historians think it was probably written much later than it claims.
interesting. But it's the prediction about Petrus Romanus, or Peter the Roman, that really seems to get people worried, right?
Yeah, it really does. This prophecy says that during the reign of Petrus Romanus, the final persecution of the Holy Roman Church
Sure.
will happen. It says Rome, the city on 7 hills, will be destroyed, and then a dreadful judge will come.
And people are freaking out about this now because Pope Francis could be the 111th or even the 112th Pope on the list, right?
That's a big part of it,
Yeah.
yeah. The fact that we're getting so close to Petrus Romanus on this list,
Yeah,
it creates this sense of urgency and even fear for some people.
right. Like it's all about to go down.
Yeah, and people try to find connections between those cryptic Latin phrases and the actual lives of the different popes. Like, for example, John Paul II, his motto was De Libore Solis, which means of the labor of the sun.
Okay.
And people have linked that to solar eclipses that happened during his birth and death. Like, whoa, maybe that's a sign.
And Benedict VI's past prophecy was,
His was Gloria Olivae, which means the glory of the olive. And that one is often linked to his Benedictine order, whose symbol is an olive branch, or, you know, just the general symbolism of peace.
okay, so people are trying to make these connections. But this Petrus Romanus figure is still pretty mysterious. Is it supposed to be a real person? Or is it more of a symbol?
That's a great question. Could it be the actual name of the next pope? Could it be someone with Roman roots or connections? Or could it be like a symbolic figure representing a certain kind of leader or a specific period in the church's history?
Right, like a placeholder for a whole era.
Exactly. The document even suggests that Pope Francis, with his focus on reform and outreach, that he could be seen as a new kind of Peter for modern times.
Interesting. And it also mentions another possibility.
Oh, yeah. Another interpretation is that Petrus Romanus might not be a person at all, but a state of being.
Yeah.
Like maybe it refers to a period of sedis vacante, when there's no pope.
Oh, like if there's no clear successor after Pope Francis?
Oh,
So even if you don't believe in it as a real prophecy, it still tells us something about how people think, right?
Absolutely. Whether you see it as divinely inspired or just a cool historical artifact, this Malachi prophecy shows how much humans love to find patterns and make meaning, especially when we're facing uncertainty and change. It's like we're using it as a lens to understand what's happening now and project our hopes and fears onto the future.
I mean, it makes sense. We want to know what's coming.
We do. And the document suggests that maybe the real value of the Malachi prophecy is that it makes us think about the fragility of institutions and the cyclical nature of history. You know, how things rise and fall and change over time.
Right, and our own anxieties about those cycles.
Exactly. Our anxieties about endings and transformations.
And the document even gets into some pretty out there theories about the possibility of, like, influencing how long popes live in relation to these prophecies.
Yeah, it does go there. It mentions how with all the advancements in medicine nowadays, popes are living longer than ever. And this has led to some theories, especially when you consider the prophecies and all the internal power dynamics within the church, about whether some people might be deliberately using advanced medical care to extend the lives of certain popes.
That's a wild thought, like to manipulate the timeline of the prophecies.
Exactly.
Okay.
One theory is that they might be trying to delay or soften the blow of prophecies like Malachi's. Like if the second to last pope lives longer, then the arrival of the last pope is pushed further into the future.
Right, you're just kicking the can down the road.
Exactly. And another theory is that it's all about controlling who comes next. You know, by extending the reign of a current pope, certain groups within the church could gain more time to either block someone they don't like from becoming pope or to strengthen their own position before a new pope is elected.
So like playing the long game with papal succession.
Yeah, it's all about strategy and power. And the document points out that Benedict VI's resignation and his long life as Pope Emeritus, that's really fueled these theories.
Because it was so unexpected.
Right, exactly. And then he lived for almost a decade after stepping down. So some people see that as suspicious. Like, was he really that frail? Or was it a calculated move?
To maybe pave the way for Pope Francis.
Possibly. The document doesn't say for sure, but it raises the question of whether Benedict's resignation was part of a bigger plan. Maybe to avoid certain prophecies or to smooth the transition to a more progressive leader. And then there are the questions about Pope Francis's own health and whether he might resign too. And if so, what role external pressures or medical factors might play in that decision.
So much intrigue at the top of the church. And when we talk about destruction in relation to Petrus Romanus, is that meant to be a literal physical destruction of Rome or something more symbolic?
That's a big question that people debate. Does the prophecy mean that Rome will be destroyed in some apocalyptic event, like a war or a natural disaster? Or is it more about a symbolic destruction, like the collapse of the church's moral authority and influence in the world?
Right, like the church falling apart from within.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the document itself asks whether the prophecy is predicting an actual end to the church or just a radical transformation into something new.
Like a rebirth of sorts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you look at what's going on in the world right now with all the conflicts and the climate crisis and the changing values, it's not hard to imagine some kind of major upheaval happening.
Yeah, for sure. So shifting gears a bit, the document talks about how the whole two popes situation after Benedict XVI resigned really exposed some deep divisions within the church.
Yeah, absolutely. Having Benedict, who was seen as a very traditional pope, living alongside Francis, who's much more progressive, it really brought to light those ideological differences that had probably been simmering for a while.
So Benedict represented like the old guard.
Yeah, you could say that. He was all about maintaining theological continuity, upholding traditional doctrines.
And Francis is more about...
Francis is more focused on pastoral care, on mercy, humility, and dialogue. He's much more open to change.
And that's definitely ruffled some feathers.
Oh, yeah. The document mentions how conservative groups within the church see Francis's openness as a threat to the church's identity. They feel like he's diluting the core beliefs.
And they're not afraid to speak out about it.
Not at all. The document specifically mentions Cardinals Burke and Sarah as leading figures in that opposition. And even the way Benedict's death and funeral were handled, some people saw that as an attempt to minimize his influence after death.
To prevent his legacy from being used to rally the traditionalists.
Exactly. So there's this ongoing struggle between the conservatives and the progressives within the church.
Yeah.
And it's a real challenge with the risk of further division or even a split.
Yeah, that would be huge. And then there's the whole issue of the church's finances, which the document says are not just about debates like LGBTQ+ issues.
It's important to clear that up. The document emphasizes that the church's financial problems aren't mainly caused by its stance on social issues. There are deeper structural issues at play. Like, first of all, the church has to maintain a massive global network of historic buildings and properties.
Like all those grand cathedrals.
Exactly. And that costs a fortune. Just think about the upkeep of St. Peter's Basilica alone. It's astronomical. Then on top of that, the sex abuse scandals have seriously damaged public trust in the church.
Which has led to a drop in donations.
People aren't giving as much anymore. And then you have the enormous legal costs and settlements from all the abuse cases. It's billions of dollars. And while the Vatican is trying to reform its finances, it's not easy. There's a lot of resistance to change from within.
So it's a multifaceted problem. And then there's the shortage of priests, especially in the West.
And that's a complex issue, too. There's the rise of secularism, of course. And then there's the mandatory celibacy rule, which some people see as an obstacle.
Right, it's a big commitment.
It is. And then you have the impact of the sex abuse scandals, which have really tarnished the image of the priesthood. It's not as attractive a vocation for many young men anymore.
Makes sense. And the document makes a point of separating the issue of sex abuse from the church's relationship with LGBTQ+ individuals.
It does. It cites studies showing that most priests who abuse children were not homosexual. So it's not accurate to link those two issues. It's a distraction from the real problems.
Right, and it often feels like a way to scapegoat a particular group.
Exactly. And then, of course, there's the whole question of the church's relationship with LGBTQ+ people in general.
Which is a really sensitive and evolving issue.
It is. The church's traditional doctrine is that marriage is only between a man and a woman, and it opposes same-sex relationships. But that clashes with how society is changing and with the experiences of many Catholics.
So there's a lot of tension there.
Absolutely. Pope Francis has tried to take a more compassionate approach. Who am I to judge, he famously said. But the official doctrine hasn't changed. So there's this ongoing internal struggle over how to reconcile tradition with the realities of the modern world.
And how to be more inclusive.
Exactly. So much to grapple with. And then on top of all that, we have this massive technological transformation that's happening. And the document argues that this is a fundamental challenge for the church.
In what ways?
Well, think about it. The digital revolution with the internet, social media, and now artificial intelligence, it challenges the church's authority, its communication methods, and even how people experience religion itself.
Right. Because people can get information from anywhere now.
Exactly. The church doesn't have that monopoly on knowledge anymore. People can Google anything they want. They can go to Wikipedia. They can access information from all over the world. And that undermines the church's traditional role as the ultimate source of truth.
And the sex abuse scandals haven't helped in that regard.
No, they haven't. The loss of moral authority makes it much harder for the church to be taken seriously in public debates.
It's lost credibility.
Exactly. And then you have social media, which is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it allows the church to reach new audiences, especially young people, through things like digital missionaries.
Like priests on TikTok.
Yeah, exactly. And the Vatican has even released a document encouraging the church to use social media for dialogue and outreach.
So they recognize its potential.
They do. But there are downsides, too. The algorithms on social media favor sensationalism and superficiality. So deeper religious messages can get lost in all the noise. And then there's the problem of misinformation, hate speech, and polarization, all of which can be amplified online. And on a more individual level, the constant digital stimulation can make it hard to find the quiet and stillness that's so important for spiritual life.
It's hard to pray when your phone's blowing up.
Exactly. So the challenge for the church is how to use these tools for good without getting sucked into the superficial and commercial aspects of it all. And how to protect space for quiet reflection and genuine human connection.
It's a balancing act, for sure. And then there's the whole AI thing, which seems like a whole other level of challenge.
AI is really a game changer. The fact that it can process language, learn from huge amounts of data, and generate human-like text, it's incredible.
Right.
And now AI can analyze theological discussions, summarize complex doctrines, compare different religions, and even answer questions about faith and morality.
So it's like having a digital theologian.
In a way. And that raises the possibility of people turning to AI instead of priests or religious scholars for answers. It's like a digital version of papal infallibility.
Like the algorithm is always right.
Yeah, that's the concern. But the document emphasizes that we shouldn't equate AI with human consciousness or spiritual depth. AI can't offer compassion or forgiveness or sacramental grace.
Right.
It can't replace the human element of faith.
Right. It's a tool, not a replacement.
Exactly. But the document does acknowledge that AI could be useful for the church in certain areas, like for theological research translation, historical analysis, and even administrative tasks.
So it's about finding the right way to use it.
Exactly. The question is, will the church reject AI, completely embrace it uncritically, or find a way to integrate it ethically and thoughtfully while always prioritizing the human person and the spiritual dimension?
And then there's the case of Carlo Acutis, who was canonized as the patron saint of the internet in a way.
His canonization was definitely a big deal. It was seen as a kind of canonization of digitalization because Carlo used computers and the internet to spread his faith. He created a website about Eucharistic miracles, which was really innovative for the time.
So he's like a model for how to use technology for good.
Exactly. He shows that you can live a devout life in the digital age and use technology to share your faith. But the document also cautions against letting faith become too adapted to digital media. You know, there's a risk of it becoming superficial and losing that vital connection to physical community and real-world encounters.
Right. You can't have virtual sacraments replace the real thing.
Exactly. So it's about finding that balance. And then finally, the document delves into this really fascinating idea of a quantum priest.
Oh, okay. Yeah, let's talk about that. What's that all about?
Well, it starts by acknowledging that deep down, humans are always searching for meaning, for love, for connection to something bigger than ourselves, and for transcendence. And it points out that this search continues, even with all the historical shifts, the institutional crises, and the technological revolutions that we're going through.
Right. We're still looking for something beyond ourselves.
Exactly. And then the document highlights some interesting parallels between concepts in quantum mechanics, like superposition and entanglement, and ideas from ancient mystical traditions about the interconnectedness of reality and the power of consciousness.
So it's like science and spirituality are starting to converge.
In a way.
Yeah.
And while the document is careful not to equate the two directly, it does point to a growing dialogue between these fields.
So what exactly is this quantum priest then? Is it like a new kind of priest?
Not necessarily. The document presents it more as a metaphor for a new type of consciousness, a way of seeing and interacting with reality that goes beyond the traditional boundaries between the material and spiritual, between science and faith, and between reason and intuition.
So it's not about a specific person, but a way of being.
Exactly. The quantum priest is someone who deeply explores the connections between consciousness and the universe, who integrates ancient wisdom with modern science, and who helps others to cultivate this expanded awareness.
So like a spiritual guide for the digital age.
Yeah, you could say that.
Yeah.
And the document asks this really provocative question. Could the church itself become a kind of quantum priest for the 21st century?
That's a big question. So how could the church do that? What would that look like?
Well, the document suggests that it might involve embracing a kind of paradox. The church would need to become more transparent in its operations while simultaneously deepening its spiritual richness and its connection to mystical traditions.
So simpler on the outside, richer on the inside.
Exactly. And would need to adapt to new technologies, maybe even exploring things like quantum computers for theological analysis, but without reducing faith to mere algorithms or data.
Right. Technology can be a tool, but not a replacement for faith.
Exactly. The church's role, ultimately, is to create spaces for the transcendent, for the miraculous, for beauty, for compassion, for genuine love, and for the experience of grace.
So looking at the big picture here, what's the path forward for the church in these crazy times?
The document acknowledges that the Catholic Church is facing some serious challenges right now, with all the internal divisions, the financial burdens, the moral scandals, and the digital revolution. It suggests that prophecies like Malachi's might reflect the deep anxieties that people within the church are feeling. And it emphasizes that the biggest challenge is finding a way to balance preserving tradition with adapting to a rapidly changing world. The church can't pretend that the digital revolution isn't happening. It has to figure out how to engage with it.
And AI is a huge part of that.
Absolutely. AI challenges the church's authority and its traditional ways of providing information and guidance. But the document reminds us that the church has been through tough times before, and it's always found ways to adapt and transform. It survived the fall of Rome, the Reformation, the Enlightenment totalitarian regimes.
So it's resilient.
It is. And the future probably won't be about choosing between tradition and modernity. It'll be about finding a synthesis, a way to integrate the altar and the algorithm.
So what does that mean in practice? What will the church's role be in this digital age?
The document suggests that the church needs to be a critical conscience in a world that's increasingly superficial. It needs to be a source of genuine community, deep meaning, authentic transcendence, and unconditional love rooted in human dignity. It needs to embrace technology ethically and use it as a tool of grace to serve humanity's spiritual needs.
So not fearing technology, but using it wisely.
Exactly. And the document quotes someone named Matija Ackerbeck, who says we should be rebels not against machines, but against soullessness.
I like that. So if the church can find this balance, it might not only survive, but actually thrive in this new world.
That's the hope. It might rediscover its relevance and become a beacon of hope and meaning for people who are struggling to find their place in the digital age. The path of transformation won't be easy, but it might be the only way forward.
And the document ends with a really interesting analogy.
It compares the church to a grand cathedral that's been updated with modern lighting, but still has its old bells ringing.
So blending the old and the new.
Exactly. And then it leaves us with some big questions. Will the church manage to bridge the gap between its ancient foundations and the emerging power of algorithms? Will we see a Pope 3.0 or even a quantum entity leading the faithful? Who will be the infallible quantum priest in this new era? And will this be a fundamental transformation for the church in the coming millennium?
Wow, those are some really thought-provoking questions.
The author ends by saying they're pondering these questions for their Bellis Happy Life Society and for all their friends, and they thank the reader for their attention.
So there you have it, a deep dive into the complex and fascinating world of the Catholic Church, as seen through the lens of circa 3.0.
We hope you've gained a better understanding of the historical context, the challenges the church is facing right now, and the potential directions it might take in the future.
This document definitely raises some big questions about how ancient institutions can adapt to radical technological shifts, about the role of faith in a digital world, about how our human need for meaning and connection can find expression in the 21st century.
And it leaves us with a final thought to ponder. Could this idea of a quantum priest actually represent a shift in collective consciousness, a move towards a more interconnected and holistic understanding of faith and reality that goes beyond traditional structures and hierarchies.
That's a really interesting idea, something to think about for sure. So thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We encourage you to keep exploring these ideas and to keep seeking those aha moments.
Keep digging deeper.
Exactly. And we'll see you next time on the deep dive.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.